everywhere. It dots the landscape over lots of cities, especially on the edges of some of the most historic kinds of cities around the world. People put them on hilltops or on mountaintops in certain places. It's one of the most popular forms of jewelry that people wear. It's a very popular decoration to have in homes. We can draw it in less than a second. We can make it, the shape of it, with our fingers. It's in nearly every church that exists in the world. And it's in evangelical, Protestant, Catholic, any label you choose for any kind of church. And it's what? The cross. We love the cross. So many people love the cross. It's a beautiful thing. It's a pretty thing. It's a decorative thing. It's something that brings positive ideas in so many ways to so many of us today. But it wasn't that way in Jesus' day. In fact, every ancient culture around the area that Jesus lived in used the cross for crucifixion. They used it to punish people. So to them, the cross was a signal of punishment. It was something that the worst of criminals, the slaves of society, were put to death on. It was usually used when somebody threatened the authority of the government, or when somebody was subversive, or when somebody did something that just was not allowed to happen in that culture. They were punished in a big way. And that big way was by putting somebody on a cross. And the reason they did it that way is because it was a huge deterrent to see somebody, as horrible as it is to picture, hanging on a cross. Whether they were tied there, or nailed there, or however they were attached there, it would have been horrible to see somebody on a cross. So governments would do that as a show to everybody to say, that's your fate if you do what they did. So how could it be that something like the cross, which was something that people hung on in Jesus' day, became something that we could stand on in our day? We started talking last week about things that we can stand on, things that are bigger than us, things that are stronger than the stuff that we deal with, or the circumstances we go through, or the questions we have. What are those things that are strong enough and big enough that we can stand on, the things that we can trust in so much that they can lead us through anything that happens? What are the shared things that we have that God has given us at every age, at every situation in our lives, at every phase? What are the things that you and I can stand on and claim as big, and to say, here we stand? The first one we looked at last week was the Bible. And it's interesting because the Bible has always been something that people have sort of looked up to and respected. I mean, certainly not everybody has respected the Bible, but at least in cultures that follow God or follow Jesus, people have always respected the Bible. It's never been something that people just push off to the side and think it's unimportant. It's always been important. And so the Bible was the first thing that we can stand on, which is interesting because the cross hasn't always been that way. For a long time, it was something that people looked at as punishment and horrible, and we would never respect that or honor that or wear that. I mean, people in Jesus' day didn't go walking around with cross necklaces or cross rings or t-shirts with crosses, or put crosses on their horses or their cars or their I mean, people didn't do that because the cross was something completely different than what it is now. So what is it about the cross that lets us stand on it, if it was that different in Jesus' day? Well, to get there, I think it's helpful to look at a letter from the Apostle Paul, because they were dealing with this same question of what is it about the cross that's so important. So imagine for a second that you were living in Greece, specifically in Corinth in Greece. We talked about Athens and what Athens was like a few weeks ago. Corinth wasn't too different. This is the place that is not all that different, actually, than living today. They prized diversity. They celebrated new ideas and fresh new things. There was a huge difference between the rich and the poor. They prized wealth and prosperity and success. I mean, they were highly progressive. That was their day. That was their culture. Those are the things that they looked for. People prized wisdom, and they really thought that their minds could get them where they wanted to go. They were highly steeped in philosophy and Greek culture, and so they thought, yeah, I can think my way to good things. So this was the world that they lived in, and it was so much that way that they believed that they, as a city and even as a state, they had power. Within themselves, they had so much going for them. They had such good minds. They were so far ahead of so many other people in the world, they believed. They had power. So Paul wrote a letter to Corinth. It's called Corinthians because it's written to the church in Corinth that he started. And it wasn't that long before that he started the church. And you can imagine, can't you, that in a city like that, you'd have to be a church full of pretty strong people to be able to withstand the push and the direction of so many things in their culture. There's so many things to resist and so many things to fight against and so many things to work through. How do I live and how do I think when my culture is like this? I mean, not all that different than today. So Paul wrote this letter to these people because they were not doing very well at resisting the things around them. In fact, they were bending to a lot of the things that were happening in the culture. So Paul writes them this letter to address that. And can we guess what he uses to address that? He uses the cross. So here goes. Here's what he says. And this is, keep in mind, this is right near the beginning of the letter. So it's like he opens the letter and then all of a sudden this is the first thing he's putting out there as if to say, this is the basic. This is what we can stand on. He says, the message of the cross is foolish to those who are headed for destruction. But we who are being saved know it is the very power of God. As the scriptures say, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and discard the intelligence of the intelligent. So where does this leave the philosophers, the scholars, and the world's brilliant debaters? God has made the wisdom of this world look foolish. Since God in his wisdom saw to it that the world would never know him through human wisdom, he has used our foolish preaching to save those who believe. It is foolish to the Jews who ask for signs from heaven, and it's foolish to the Greeks who seek human wisdom. So when we preach that Christ was crucified, the Jews are offended and the Gentiles say it's all nonsense. But to those called by God to salvation, both Jews and Gentiles, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. This foolish plan of God is wiser than the wisest of human plans, and God's weakness is stronger than the greatest of human strength. I mean, Paul is so speaking their language. The language of wisdom and the language of power and the language of I can do better and the language of all these things that they were living. And he's speaking their language, especially right in the middle when he says it's foolish to the Jews and it's foolish to the Greeks. I mean, he's saying this is what it comes across to you as. And he openly, he freely admits that the cross, it makes next to no sense to most of these people. Because for the Jewish people, they were looking for signs and miracles and all these amazing things, and the cross does not fit the mold of a powerful, amazing sign that God could do. And for the Greek people, who are the big thinkers, they look at the cross and they think, that's absolutely foolish. That makes no logical sense. So Paul admits, it is ridiculous. It does not make sense. It does not match what you're looking for. But, Paul says, to those called by God to salvation, both Jews and Gentiles, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. In other words, it's like Paul is saying, hold on. Don't pass judgment too quickly. This thing that doesn't make sense, this thing that seems foolish, it's actually God doing the most wise and powerful kind of work. But let's not get ahead of ourselves too much. First, I think we have to figure out what is it that the cross actually did. So in order to do that, let's watch this for a minute.
We all long for the world to be good, for people to live in peace, act with love and justice. But there's a problem. Something compels us humans to constantly wreak havoc and destruction instead, and we call this evil.
And from the Bible's point of view, evil ruins things in at least two ways. There's a direct effect of our evil, like when someone steals from another person, they've created injustice.
Yeah, therefore, they owe something to make it right.
But there's another indirect effect of evil, because they've also ruined the environment of the relationship, creating a lack of trust, there's emotional damage. It's like vandalism, and they need to make that right, too.
Now, many people believe, hey, God is good. He should be the one to just get rid of all the evil in the world.
But let's be honest. The evil that I see everywhere out there, it's the same evil that's inside of me. We have all contributed, and we keep doing it.
And so this kind of puts us in a bind. If God's going to rid the world of evil, he'll have to get rid of us.
And this is what's so remarkable about the story of the Bible. This God is so good that not only is he going to rid the world of evil, he's going to do it without destroying humanity.
So how is he going to do that?
Well, early in the story of the Bible, we're introduced to this practice of animal sacrifice, which I know, it seems weird to us, but for the Israelites, it was a very powerful symbol of God's justice and of his grace. So remember, I'm a contributor to the evil that's in the world. I should be removed. But God is allowing this animal's life to be a substitute. It's symbolically dying in my place. And the biblical word for this is atonement, which means to cover over someone's debt. But there's a second part to this ritual. Remember, evil also causes this relational vandalism. And in the Bible, this idea is described as polluting or defiling the land and making it unclean. So the priest would symbolically wash away the vandalism by sprinkling the animal's blood in different parts of the temple.
So the animal's blood is cleaning things?
Well, remember, this is a symbol, and it's a symbol that we're not used to. The blood represents life. And the sprinkling of the blood is this representation of how God is cleaning away these indirect consequences of evil in their community. In the Bible, this process is called purification. And so the temple and the land now become a clean space where God and his people can live together in peace.
So this ritual makes things right between Israel and God.
And more than that, the Israelites experience God's love and his grace through these symbols. And by being forgiven, ideally, this would compel them to become people of love and grace too.
Right, that's the ideal, but it wasn't always happening.
Right. So the prophet Isaiah, for example, he talks a lot about this. He opens his book by saying that the continual sacrifices of the Israelites had become meaningless because they were also allowing great evil in their midst, ignoring the poor and the oppressed. Even the Israelite kings were distorting justice. But Isaiah looked forward to a day when a new king from the line of David would come and deal with evil, but in a surprising way. The king would become a servant. And not just serve, but also suffer and die for the evil committed by his own people. And his life would be offered as a sacrifice.
And this is the promise Jesus believed he was fulfilling. He's the King of Israel, suffering and dying on the cross.
In fact, Jesus himself used Isaiah's words when he said that he came to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. And that word ransom refers to his sacrifice of atonement. And so all over the New Testament, we hear about how Jesus' death was an atoning sacrifice for us. It covered the debt that humans owe God for contributing to all of the evil and death in his world. But the New Testament authors also talk about Jesus' death as providing purification. And so we hear about Jesus' blood as a symbol of his life, having this ability to wash away the vandalism that evil has caused in us and around us, so we can now live at peace with God.
So that's the meaning behind Jesus' death.
I hope that helps, at least in some point, show some of how the cross fits. It fits God's plan and the way God set everything up. It fits our needs. It fits the situation and the problems that we have and relationship with God that's strained. It's like the cross bridges the gap, or it fits the empty space. It fits because it does something that we can't do. And what's kind of crazy is God took this symbol, this thing that meant something horrible and punishing, and he changed it into something so completely different and good for us. And at least to me, I just see that is an enormous change that God brought about. It's way beyond what I can imagine. It's way bigger than I can fathom could happen. It's way different than I think. But that's the way that God works. And so, we've all heard that famous line before from the Bible that God's ways are not like our ways. God's thoughts are so different than our thoughts. God's way with the cross is so radically different from our thoughts or our ways. The cross shows us, we could say that God's way is way different. If God's way of dealing with our lives is way different, then that means something for how we see the cross and how the cross fits into our lives. Isaiah was the one who made that line in the Bible famous, that my thoughts are not like your thoughts, my ways are not like your ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways. God's way is so way different than ours. And that doesn't mean that we can't understand God's way. It just means that God's ways are so much bigger. God's wisdom is wiser than the wise, and God's power is more powerful than what we see as the most powerful. God's ways are so different. But because God's ways are so much more wise and so much more powerful, we can stand on even what God does in redeeming something like the cross. We talked last week a little bit about Martin Luther, this guy 500 years ago who basically revolutionized the church and who might be the most influential figure about what we all believe about Jesus. There were lots of people who were influential, but he was perhaps the one who had the most and greatest impact on the things that we think. In his day, what he was looking at is he was looking at the things that the church saw as the things that they could stand on. The things that were the most important. And what he did is he basically took their list of what was most important or what they could stand on, and he made a new list. And can you guess what he put at the top of the list? Yeah, he put the cross at the top of the list. He did. I mean, people have studied him and looked at him and said that for Martin Luther, the thing that he put at the forefront, at the top, at the center of his understanding about God and our relationship with God, it is the cross. And it's as if he walked in this room and he saw the cross over there. In a sense, he would say, that's too far away. Because it can't be on the fringe of our lives. It can't be on the outskirts. It can't be separate from the things that you and I deal with, the questions we ask and the things that we deal with every day. It's got to be closer. And it's as if he would walk in here and he would say, no, that's too far. We've got to move this somewhere. So let's put it right here. Let's put it right in the middle. Let's put it right in the middle so that we have to look through it to see each other. It's kind of in the way, and that's good if it's in the way and it's a little uncomfortable. Because it should be. Because when you and I think about people that we need to deal with, what if we start with the cross? Or if we think about decisions we have to make that are hard, what if we say, well, what would the cross do? I'm having a hard time seeing Greg and Iris, and it's really uncomfortable to me right now. And now I'm having to. It is uncomfortable, and that's okay, because the cross needs to be at the center of our lives. And if Luther said anything, he said, put it at the center. And that's the same thing that Paul's talking about. He's talking about the fact that if the cross is not at the center of our lives, then we need to change something. Because God's ways are totally different. They're way different. They're so different that they brought the cross right into the middle so that it changes the way we think, the way we treat people, the way we make decisions, the way we act. The cross can influence everything about who we are, and we can stand on it. In other words, when we take a step and stand on the cross, God calls us to live a way different life. We're going to live differently because the cross is in the center of our lives. It's going to cause us to do something. One of the famous things that Jesus said, one of the most famous things that Jesus said, had to do with the cross. And it was even before Jesus was on a cross. He said something about a cross. He said something about, you must take up your cross daily and follow me. See, what was happening is Jesus was talking with his closest, his 12 friends, and there was this discussion going on about, well, who is Jesus? Some people were thinking, oh, he's Elijah the prophet brought back, or he's one of God's great teachers, or he's just really influential. And Jesus was saying to his 12, well, who do you say that I actually am? Make a choice. Take a stand. Who am I? And people make some statements, and then Peter, of course, is the one who steps up, and he takes the step, he makes the risk, and he says, you are the Christ. You are the Savior. You are the Son of God. And it's as if this is a victory point. It's the hinge point, actually, in all of the gospel stories about Jesus. And it's as if the disciples are like, we've arrived. We've figured out the puzzle and the mystery. And then Jesus immediately starts talking about the fact that he's going to die and suffer. And Peter steps up and he says, no, that's not how the story goes. That's not the right ending to the story. And Jesus says, for anyone who comes after me, you must take up your cross daily and follow me. It's like we're supposed to live with all of the cross in our lives. We're supposed to live with the cross in the center of our lives. All the hope wrapped up in the cross, all of what Jesus has done wrapped up in the cross, all of the pain wrapped up in the cross, all the victory wrapped up in the cross, we're supposed to carry it with us so that it's at the center of our lives. Now, would that cause us to live in a different way if we carried that around? I hope so. I think it would. So what would it look like? How do we get there? How do we take a step closer to the cross being at the center of our lives and being able to stand on the cross? I think in so many ways. We need to read more about the cross. We need to read Bible verses about the cross. We need to ask people who are smarter than each of us, how does the cross make a difference? And there's some smart people who have some great responses to that. What difference does the cross make if it's the middle of your life? We need to take time to ask Jesus, why does it matter that the cross is in the middle of our lives? We need to ask each other, what does it mean if the cross is at school with us and is at work with us? And if I wear it, it means something more than a decoration. What if the cross is in the middle of our lives? If it is, it proves that God's ways are way different, but it also leads us to live a way different life. Let's pray.